In this module, we're going to be looking at managing storage, managing data, and managing access to printers. And so we've got a lot of different topics that are all somewhat related. We're going to start at the actual storage level. In this section, we're going to be looking at managing hard disks and the different types of disk styles that we can use and the different types of volumes that can be set up and the actual utilities that we're going to be using to work on those. Then we will look at an additional way of handling storage space or hard disk, and that is called a storage space. It gives you a little bit more flexibility. It was introduced in Windows 8 and now is available in Windows 10. Then we'll kind of shift gears. We'll talk about data access, so not the physical drives themselves and the layout, but how do we control data access? How is data access controlled in Windows in general? And it is controlled via different types of permissions, determining what type of access an individual has to a file or folder. This is NTFS permissions or shared folder permissions. And so we'll go take a look at those. We're also going to look at a feature on Windows servers, Server 2012 R2 or later, although there isn't anything later at this point other than technical previews. They have a feature known as work folders, and it's a particular setup allowing you to have users who synchronize a shared folder between their device and the server. It's a cool feature. We'll look at the ins and outs of that. Another option that you have for synchronizing and utilizing cloud storage for data is OneDrive. We'll talk about OneDrive and OneDrive for Business. And really what we're trying to do is distinguish between these. What's the differences? What scenarios are these going to be used in and whatnot? And then we'll have a section on managing printers. Printers are just as important as data a lot of times because they allow us to create a hard copy, and that's still necessary in many, many environments. So having laid that out as to what we're going to be doing in the module, we're going to jump in here in the first section into managing hard disks. The Windows 10 definitely simplifies the process of managing drives on the local system and allocating free space. This is often with options that have been unavailable previously. You know, storage spaces was kind of available in Windows 8.1, but you've got some things in the settings app that analyze the current storage that you have that weren't available. You've got some flexibility that you didn't always have. Administrators are going to need to understand a number of different things. You're going to need to understand the types of partitions and volumes that are available to us and the differences between them. How to create partitions and volumes is another important thing. What tools to use and the different options. How to perform disk maintenance like disk cleanup, disk defrag. How to troubleshoot disk both physically and logically. How to work with virtual hard drives. And then the situations that we would encounter that would require multiple disks. All of those are going to be things that are important for us to be aware of. So let's start with the partition styles. There are two partition styles. This is consistent with the preceding operating systems. They are the master boot record or MBR disk type or the GPT, which stands for GUID partition table. GUID is just globally unique identifier. Really the difference here is how the partition tables are laid out. I mean, that's looking at it fairly simplistically, but I mean, that is the primary difference. In an MBR style disk, which is the kind of traditional style, you have a master boot record that's created on the first sector of the disk. And in that master boot record, it lists the sizes and the locations, the physical locations of the partitions on the hard drive. The master boot record table, though, is limited to 4 primary partitions. You can use extended partitions and logical drives to get around that limit, but the limit still exists. And then you have a maximum partition size of 2 terabytes. One issue here is that there's no redundancy. That master boot record is stored in a very common place. It's always been known, and it can easily be corrupted or destroyed, and that would render it difficult or impossible to actually get at the information on the hard drive. Okay? So the GUID partition table type is an array of partition entries. Each partition is identified by a globally unique identifier, hence the name. You can technically have 128 partitions per disk, although obviously excessive. And partitions can also be up to 18 exabytes in size. That's also a little bit excessive at this point. There is some redundancy. It's a CRC, a cyclical redundancy check, that's used in order to ensure that if the table is lost or those entries for the partitions are lost, that they can actually be rebuilt. So GPT is more redundant, and GPT is going to provide us with additional capabilities. We have several disk management tools in Windows 10. They can do different things. They don't all get used for the same purposes. Of course, the Storage in Settings app is the new one. That's what we're seeing here in the screenshot. It identifies storage utilization. It can be used to clean up disk, and it can be used to configure default save locations, okay? So some fairly simplistic, at this point, some fairly simplistic stuff that's available in the Settings app. However, it's also very useful. I believe I had mentioned before this categorizing thing. So you can see here that this is from a home computer that actually had more on it. So categorizing and showing, you know, of the drive, we're using 215 gigs, and, you know, 6 gigs is pictures, almost 60 gigs of music, OneDrive 20 gigs. So it kind of lays it out for you and shows you maybe where you need to focus efforts. That's a lot of music if you are trying to clean stuff up, okay? So that's invaluable, and before it took third-party tools. So while it's not a whole lot of, you know, massive amounts of configuration that you can do in the Settings app, it's still a useful feature. Disk management is where we're still gonna go to do advanced disk management. And by advanced disk management, I mean creating partitions, modifying partitions, assigning drive letters or mount points, you know, extending, shrinking volumes, changing the disk style, adding new hard drives. All of that can be done in disk management. Technically, it can be done with DiskPart or Windows PowerShell as well. DiskPart has been the traditional command line method for disk management. Windows PowerShell, though, does have several different commandlets that will allow you to work with disks. And then you also have storage spaces in Control Panel. Storage space can be slightly different. So I'm going to show you all the traditional ways to use disk management to do things, and then we can go and discuss and look at the storage spaces feature in the next section. So let's take a look at our disk management stuff. We'll start over in Settings, Settings, and then System, and then you have a storage area, okay? So we can choose the drive that documents and music and whatnot are going to be stored to. And so if I have a secondary drive that I'm using for storage, then, you know, that's probably where we want to go. You know, it'll just create a documents directory in there. You can clearly see the utilization of the drive. And when we open this up, it will then start to categorize it for me. I know I don't have a lot going on here, so I don't really have, you know, many pictures. But if you want, you can see I can click and get into that. Apps and games would be the same. When you click on apps and games, it's going to sort them, or it's going to bring them up, and I can sort by size, or I can click individual things. And you can decide whether or not all of these are something that you want, you know. And so this is just an easy way of getting in and clicking to uninstall. It's just a link really to that, okay? Go to System Files, and then we can see, I don't know that we had gone all this, we can see how many system files, how much virtual memory is being used, what's the size of your hibernation file, and how many copies of restore points you have. And so with every single one of these, you can click on it and it'll identify or help you to kind of clean those up, okay? Hit Manage OneDrive and it's just gonna open this up, and you can choose exactly which folders and whatnot that you want to synchronize. Okay, so that's the storage app, and as I said, I mean, there's not a whole lot that you can do there, but what you can do is very useful. I'm gonna switch over to my virtual machine here to go in and show disk management. This is in the Administrative Tools and Control Panel. I'm just going to go on the shortcut route to open it up. When I open, let me just cancel that. Okay, when I open this, you can see I've added a couple of additional Hard drives. Okay, I've already got some unallocated space here. We've added some additional hard drives. The first thing that you're going to have to do is initialize the disk, and it's during that time where you're identifying, what type of disk you want to use. Okay. Now, in general, the rule of thumb is still MBR if you've got a disk that's less than 2 terabytes. GPT if it's more than 2 terabytes. Mind you, that does not take into account the stuff that we talked about in regards to redundancy. So if you're looking for redundancy and fault tolerance, then GPT is the better way to go. We're just testing this here, so I'm going to make those all MBR, and then they're going to show up as unallocated space, and at that point we would be able to create volumes inside them. We'd be able to work with existing volumes, changing drive letter and path, extending, shrinking, deleting, but you can't delete the C drive. Okay, and so this is nice because it gives me wizards to do everything. This management tool also gives me the ability to create and manage VHDs. So you can access virtual hard drives just the same way as you would a physical hard drive. All right. And then you do have DiskPart and PowerShell. The DiskPart command line utility is an interactive utility. List disk, it will list out the disk that you want to deal with. If you wanted to say you wanted to work on disk 1, we would say select disk 1, and I would list partitions, or partition, sorry. And there are no partitions, and so then at that point I could say, okay, I want to create a partition, and if you want help, you can do that. Create partition, primary. You can keep going to see if there are additional, if there's additional help. Okay. If I just do this, then it's going to create a partition, and then when I say list partition, I'm going to see that it created a partition the entire size of the drive. All right, right over there. And then in DiskPart we can do the format. Okay, so if you just put a question mark, there's a format. You always have to select partition 1. And then we would format, and then it's going to go through and do the format. It's going to do NTFS. Actually, I have to check that. I think it's doing NTFS by default. You can specify the file system of NTFS or FAT32 as it goes through the format. So you can use DiskPart if you want. Let's try to open up another window while that's going. Inside the storage module in PowerShell, you're going to have a number of different commands. Okay, not every one of all of these commands are in the management of storage, but it's not all the same thing. So I've got get disk, get physical disk. I've got new partition, new volume. Those are the kinds of things, or those are the kinds of commands that can be used to manage storage within PowerShell. Okay, so here again we see I'm going to grab disk, and I'm going to say, let's say get disk number 3. Okay, it gives me more information about it. I can use the new volume command. New volume command on disk 3. Let's instead of doing this, let's run the help on new volume and ask for some examples. Okay, that was very helpful. Thank you for all the examples, Microsoft. No, that help is apparently not populated. Okay, so anyway, you can create a new volume, and basically on the new volume you're just going to be choosing the type and the disk and the drive letter. Get volume. I'm going to show you the list of volumes. That's often a good way of seeing what I would need to do in order to create a volume, because you're going to be able to specify these kinds of things. Okay, so when you create a new volume, it's on this disk, it's with this file system, it's a particular drive letter and whatnot. So the whole reason I came in here is not to even look at a lot of these in detail, but basically just to show you how you can list out the commands in the storage module, which do give you the ability to manage your storage via PowerShell, right? This looks like this format is complete. You've got the assign command, which would assign a drive letter, because right now, formatted with NTFS, but not assigned a drive letter, so you'd have to assign a drive letter to it. Diskpart is primarily used, and PowerShell could primarily be used within Windows PE as a part of troubleshooting, but more than likely as a part of enterprise deployment when you're using imaging.